hand.
Odetta, the late, great Odetta, singing in our Firehouse studio 1 year after the September 11th attacks. It was September 11th, 2002. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to a group of victims that are often forgotten in the September 11th narrative, the many rescue workers who have fallen sick after being exposed to contaminants at Ground Zero. According to a new article by ProPublica, recently uncovered documents show that federal officials in Washington and New York went further than was previously known to downplay concerns about health risks. The article says those officials misrepresented or concealed information that might have protected thousands of people from the contaminated air at Ground Zero.
Meanwhile, a new study has provided potentially groundbreaking evidence of a link between exposure to toxic debris at Ground Zero and the development of cancer. The medical journal Lancet reports male firefighters exposed to dust and smoke at Ground Zero have a 19% higher risk of developing cancer than colleagues who were not exposed. The finding comes just a month after the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health issued that there is insufficient evidence to draw a link between the smoldering ruins of the World Trade Center after 9/11 and cancer. Firefighters and rescue workers have been unable to receive payments for cancer treatments because cancer is not covered under the legislation providing care for 9/11 responders. In 2009, we spoke with Dr. Jacqueline Moline about the prevalence of cancer among Ground Zero workers. She was the director of the World Trade Center Medical Monitoring and Treatment Program at Mount Sinai School of Medicine at the time.
We saw a group of younger workers at the site who developed cancer of the immune system, a multiple myeloma. And while it's premature to be able to say that rates in general are elevated as a result of the exposures, what we're seeing is an unusual age distribution. It's a cancer usually we see in 60 or 70-year-old folks. And we saw 4 people under the age of 45. We've also seen other folks who are in the younger age category, much higher than we would expect. We would expect 1 person with cancer under 45 in the size of the population that we're following.
That was Dr. Jacqueline Moline, who was the director of the World Trade Center Medical Monitoring and Treatment Program at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. Well, for more on 9/11-related health elements, we're joined by 2 guests here in New York. Anthony DePalma, former New York Times correspondent who covered 9/11 health issues. He's also the author of City of Dust, Illness, Arrogance, and 9/11. His latest article for ProPublica is called New Docs Detail How Feds Downplayed Ground Zero Health Risks. And we're joined by Joel Kupferman, executive director of the New York Environmental Law and Justice Project, was co-counsel for a group of residents and workers suing the EPA and ex-EPA head Christine Todd Whitman. And, of course, Juan. Now, of course, Juan's co-host on Democracy Now!, but he is also the author of Fallout, The Environmental Consequences of the World Trade Center Collapse. Amazing, Juan. Your book came out just really months after the September 11th attacks, exposing particularly Christine Todd Whitman and what she had to say at the time.
Yes, that was in May of 2002. And I'd like to begin first with Anthony. The latest article that you've come up with in ProPublica. Could you talk about that and the new revelations?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to make clear that these documents that we were able to review, because they were gotten through Freedom of Information request by the New York Committee on Occupational Safety and Health, build on a lot of the reporting that you did. Mm-hmm. So let's get that straight. I mean, you were there at the beginning, and you sort of pointed at these issues at a time when the government was saying, well, maybe we don't need to worry about it. Mm-hmm. And so you raised the flag, and Joel also getting some documents early on. What these go beyond what we already knew. We knew that there had been a certain amount of manipulation on the part of the White House, but what this shows is that they really were doing it from the very beginning, and there was a concern. You know, it's interesting that we're talking now right after you did that piece on the World Trade Center building and how costly it is and how much it's supposed to be a symbol of something that's sort of gone, the whole thing has gone awry. In many ways, what was happening back then is that they were really worried about symbolism, and the symbolism of people getting back to work no matter what, and they didn't level with people, and that's the most disturbing thing. There were clear warnings. specifically on Water Street, which for those people in this area know is not far from Wall Street, that showed that the levels of contaminants in the air were too high for people to go back. That was removed, which was bad enough, and then replaced with a recommendation that people go back to work. They were urged to go back, even though the early samples were showing that there were high levels of contaminants.
And you point out also that in many cases they were telling people it was safe before they had even finished conducting initial tests.
In one email exchange that happens on the 13th, so it's just a day and a half later, the people in Washington at the White House Council on Environmental Quality are telling the people up here, hey, Christine Whitman is coming up. She's going to talk to reporters because all the results so far have been so positive. Well, all the results so far showed almost nothing because there were almost no results. And yet they were committed to this message of reassurance despite the facts, and that's not the way it should happen.
And the effects of this, Joel Kupferman, talk about the people you have represented down at Ground Zero.
I've represented the firefighters. I've represented the residents in Lower Manhattan, the students at Stuyvesant High School, office workers, and they are definitely suffering from 9/11 exposure. What was interesting was that we knew that these substances were cancerous. We knew with certainty that there was lead, there was dust, silica, and everything else that was there, and yet I think we're blaming a little too much on the federal government. The city had a big stake there also. The city knew what was there, and part of the problem is that they did not allow those workers to protect themselves.
We were at a panel yesterday that had dealt with 9/11, and afterwards you told me something that really stuck in my mind. You said that that given the climate and the change in government procedures since 9/11, it would probably be much more difficult if another disaster occurred for you to get the Freedom of Information FOIL responses that you got back in 2001 so quickly, and that it would be a lot more difficult now to get the kind of information you were able to unearth back then.
That's totally true. As a matter of fact, we went down to the Gulf to see what was going down there, and we found that workers weren't even allowed to take the samples of the soil that they had at the places. We also found that at community meetings that people weren't even allowed to record or take pictures of the ongoing talks. But we want to say is that what's interesting now is that it's the Union Fire Department studies present that shows that there's cancer there. What we objected to was that when the city went to hire all those cleanup workers, after the city and the Fed said that there is a problem down there, we asked that there be baseline tests on those workers to show what levels they were at, and then if they got sick, we could show how they got sick and to get immediate benefits. But the city refused to put those baseline tests in, and they made those people go through many, many hurdles to get any type of benefits.
Over the years, we've talked to many workers at Ground Zero, what's called the Pile. In 2009, we spoke to Joe Pecoro, a former freelance iron worker, worked at Ground Zero after 9/11, suffering from terminal lung disease, 42 years old. This is how he described his condition.
Well, right now I'm hooked up to my oxygen machine. My lungs are. I went to the doctor yesterday, and it was, we didn't get good news. So basically, the doctor said, if he could get me another year or two, he would, he'd be surprised. And so I'm on 37 medications. Well, actually 39. He put me on 2 more when I went to see him yesterday. And most of my problems come from my lungs, but my whole body is racked with pain. All my joints. It's just like a laundry list of problems that if it's not one thing, it's another. breathing, like I said, is the hardest. Like I said, I'm hooked up to oxygen now. My lungs have concrete and glass and human bone fragments in them. And, so what happens is your lungs are the only organ that rejuvenate themselves. And mine, instead of growing viable lung tissue, they're growing, it's growing scar tissue. So it's making my lungs get bigger and bigger. And when I take a deep breath, my lungs actually rub against my ribs, and it hurts.
Joe died soon after we spoke. Joe Pocuro died on October 15, 2010. And then there's Yolanda Hernandez. We spoke to her in 2007, longtime resident of the Lower East Side who suffered serious health effects from the toxic dust at Ground Zero. I asked her to describe where she was on September 11th and what happened afterwards.
That day, I be in my house, and I see, they coming a lot of dust in my house, a lot of dust. So I said, what happened? I don't know what happened. So I put my head, out the window. I see, the twin, go down. So I said, oh, my God, what happened? So I told my daughter, what's going on? My daughter said, what happened? I said, everything, coming down, dust, and I be, coughing. So I tried to clean it, but 2 months later, I feel like a pain in my chest. So I go to the hospital to see what's going on, and the doctor said they have a problem, respiratory. I hear about the program in Bellevue. They have a
Bellevue Hospital.
Bellevue Hospital, Red Cross. So I go over there because they told me they do an examination complete. So they do an examination complete, and they found they have inflammation in my lung. I never have this in my life, and now I take a medication twice a day. I said to the doctor, I want to have, that inflammation on my lung. I said, yeah, because, your lungs, they're not good. And that because that's for the dust. And that coming for that. But my point is, why they lie? Why Christian would lie? The air is, is clean. What that is not true.
That was Yolanda Hernandez, longtime resident of the Lower East Side who suffered serious health effects. Joel Kupferman, is she in the zone that...
She's out of the zone. The zone was arbitrarily drawn at Canal Street. People that could receive treatment now are basically covered below Canal, and if they're above Canal, they have to go through major hurdles to prove that they're hurt.
But then they expanded the zone?
They expanded it up to Canal. First they said Reed Street. And the problem is that it left out half of Chinatown, the people north of that site, and also the people in Brooklyn and elsewhere.
And by the zone, you mean to be covered by what?
The Zodra Compensation Act.
There's a Droga Compensation Act that doesn't include cancer.
That doesn't include cancer, yes. So the problem is that these people are left out. And not only that it also just shows that from the beginning, they didn't really want to know who was hurt. They drew this arbitrary line, and it was CDC that refused to test people above that line. It was the EPA that didn't test the apartments above that line. So the problem is that we knew for certainty that the chemicals would cause those dangers in the beginning, and they also said they didn't know. And now they're telling us they don't know how many people are going to be hurt from the cancer, but we do know that there was a whole host of chemicals out there that do cause cancer.
Well, I'd like to ask Anthony DePalma, because clearly cancer is the kind of illness that takes decades to develop, and few people expected there would be even a high any kind of an increase among the workers at Ground Zero. So 10 years down the line, but now the fire department's new report comes out and says a 17% higher rate than expected compared to workers who were not at the site, firefighters and rescue people who were not at the site. Your sense of the settled science on this, obviously it's a big controversy still.
Big, absolutely. If you look at that Lancet article and the study that Dr. Prezant did, it showed that increase for all cancers. So it's not the way they normally do a study like that. So they put all the cancers together. Interestingly, what they found was that there was no increase in lung cancer. It was actually less than might have been anticipated. That's probably because firefighters are pretty healthy people, and they wouldn't have, and also younger. What that means, though, is not that there is no lung cancer. The scientists wouldn't have expected to see an increase in lung cancer because the incubation period between exposure to the